Hello, I'd like to talk to you some about hardware, nuts and bolts, more specifically bolts and nuts. And this video is actually designed to help my younger coworkers in the truck repair field. Hopefully, y'all can get a little something extra out of it. But bolts, is that SAE or is it metric? What about this one here? This one? What about this one here? Hard to know, isn't it? Here's a smaller bolt. Hash marks. What's going on here? Hash marks, different types of bolt heads, different markings and things. As you can see, I've got a wide range of bolts and stuff, like this one right here. This happens to be a head bolt. An old one, been used, been taken off. There's another one, same thing. Different various nuts and bolts. And each of them have one thing in common. And hopefully you can see these and you can get a better idea as to what I'm talking about. But some of these have numbers on them of various denominations, like these here. What are they? What do they mean? These, my friends, are metrics. So if you're going to get a wrench to tighten or loosen one of these, you need to look for metric. All right, and again, there are different numbers, different sizes, different lengths. So let's start with this one here, 8.8. What does that mean? That is actually the hardness of this bolt. Doesn't say a thing about the washers on here. It's just about the bolt itself. 8.8 means it's a specific hardness. Then you have something like this, which is, hopefully that zooms in and you can see it right. This is 10.9. So this one is a harder bolt than this one. These two, however, both say 12.9. These are harder yet than either one of these, but they're all metrics. 6 points, 12 points, whatever. Some of these kind of bolts takes an Allen head wrench or a Torx. Some of these are marked, some are not. But if you can find something that says 10.9, 12.9, 8.8, whatever, it's going to be a metric. So don't mess with getting your SAE Allens out. Get your metrics out if it shows that. If it doesn't show anything at all, well, you're kind of up a creek. Now, let's take a look at some of these others. You've got these kind that have hash marks. This big bolt, short but larger, doesn't have that many. It's only got 3 hash marks here. Now, also it has here in the middle an IH. That's actually for the old International Harvester, as I understand it. I may be wrong on that, but that's what I understand. But the 3 means this is a grade 5 hardness. These here, again, have hash marks. They have 6 with a symbol, or sometimes they'll have letters. That is an indication of the manufacturer. The 6 hash marks mean that they're grade 8 bolts. Now, the other thing is how hard are these? I don't know, they're just grade 8. That means they're harder than the grade 5. So If you want a good hard bolt, something that's going to take a whole lot of torque, get the higher hash marks. It'll handle a lot more torque than one with less or no hash marks. Because there are some, and I don't know if I've got any here right now. Yeah, like this here, no hash marks whatsoever. This probably means this is not very strong at all, and not capable of handling very much torque on it. So again, here's the thing: no 8.8 or anything like that, which means more than likely this is an SAE. So how do you know what size bolt? Say you've got a bolt that fits, but it's not quite the size you want. Well, plain old tape measure will tell you a lot about them. You can try to measure a bolt like this. You measure the length. A lot of times measuring one of these is kind of difficult to do, because if you try to do something like this and try to look, a lot of times they're in between and it's hard to tell for sure. And maybe it's metric. Okay. A lot of you will recognize this case from an earlier video I did. This was one that I showed you in my episode about modifying cases. The reason I have this up here is these right here, my end wrenches. Pull one of these out. This happens to be a 7/16. Let's see if it fits. Fits pretty good. So probably that's what this is. Let's try a 3/8. Won't quite fit. All right, so does that mean that it's a 7/16? Well, let's find out by taking out the top here and get into the metrics. Now, a 7/16 is very close to an 11 millimeter, for those of you that don't know that. Doesn't quite fit there. It does fit here. Actually fits pretty good. Does that mean that this is a 11 millimeter instead of a 7/16? Well, again, with no marks on there, it's hard to say for sure. But now this one we know is SAE, not metric. So what size bolt is it? Well, bigger than 9/16. Let's try the 5/8. Just a very tiny bit of movement. This is a 5/8, and from the looks of it, probably a fine thread. Now, let's come down here to something more like this. Oh, no, wait a minute. Let's go to this little guy. Small. Let's try this 3/8. Seems to fit pretty good. So probably this is a 3/8 bolt. Again, grade 8. And approximately 1.25 inches long. And again, using a tape measure or some sort of measuring device to get the length is the best way of getting the length. But of getting the diameter, the size of the actual threads, really nothing beats your open end wrenches. They're very simple, they're very quick. If it's loose, you know, hey, it's smaller than that. If it's too tight, you know it's bigger than that. And these also work with the metrics. You can grab a metric. Doesn't fit, but that's an 11. Doesn't quite fit. Hey, let's go up one. 12 millimeter. Barely will fit on that at all. This has, I mean, the tiniest amount of movement. And if you'll notice, this bolt is shouldered. It only has so many threads so far up. But thanks to our open end wrench, it's 12 millimeter the whole way. And something that you can do if you trying to go by pure metric, get you one of these tape measures with metric and SAE. Measure right underneath the top. This one looks like about an 85 millimeter length. So 12 by 85 millimeter. And this is a washer head bolt. This thing, most of these washer heads are actually a locking device because the outside edge of the washer will hit the surface first, and then as you apply more torque, it will go down further to the center. Not all of them are. Most of them are. I did have here one. Now this is a frame bolt. This specifically is designed to hit to the outside, and then as you apply more torque, forces this back a little bit, and the more towards the center will then contact, basically helping lock this bolt in place. Your nut, don't put just a plain nut on there. That defeats the purpose of this. What you really need is a good either top lock type nut, or better yet, an actual frame nut. This way you're getting the benefit of the double lock. And most of your frame nuts, and I don't know if you can see this very well, but this has been crushed slightly on opposite sides. That means that these are partially put in, squeezed in just a little bit, and what that means is as you thread it on, you won't be able to thread it onto this one because this is a coarse thread, whereas this is fine. Most of your frame bolts are fine. What that does is as it comes through, it encounters this slightly smaller opening here, and it helps to lock the nut onto the bolt. That way you've got better holding and clamping force. Now, why would you use end wrenches to determine the size of your bolt? Well, that way if you need to go get one or send an email to have one delivered, you know what the diameter is, and with the help of your tape measure, you can find out what the length is. And if maybe you need one that's a little longer, you can find out what the extra length happens to be. Maybe you've got one that you're needing to just that little bit extra. So take your nut, maybe it's just barely starting on there, measure the thickness of your nut, and then that way you'll have a better idea of the length of the bolt that you're needing versus the one that you have. A lot of times in the truck industry, we modify things, we install stuff, and the other bolts just aren't quite long enough. That's the reason for things like this. Now, how do you tell the thread pitch? Well, again, if it's SAE, you can merely put something in here like so, count the threads per inch, and that'll tell you. I wouldn't. Instead, get something like this here. These are your thread pitch gauge. They'll come in almost every tap and die set. And what you can do there is find the one that happens to fit your particular need, whatever it might be. You can see that right there. That fits perfectly. So all you then have to do is read this, and I know this is a 13 thread per inch. So once I know the size of the bolt, 7/16 doesn't fit, let's try half. Right there we go, 1/2 inch fits. So 1/2 inch in diameter, 13 threads per inch, and then however long you have or need. That way you can put in the email or over the phone, find out if they have what you need before going to get it. Another thing that a lot of my colleagues have problems with, let's say for instance, you've got a nut, or maybe it's a bolt, and your toolbox is away a little bit, and maybe you need to just grab something and go. How do you know for sure what size wrench to use on this? Wrench, socket, whatever. Well, if you've got a tape measure, you can simply measure it and see. And now sometimes these larger tape measures are kind of bulky to carry. So if you go to any small store that does kind of crafts or have little gift deals for dads and such, you can get these little tape measures for next to nothing. A couple bucks, carry them in your pocket, carry them in a pouch, whatever. This one's very old. I do mean very old. I've had it many years, and as you can see, the first ones are pretty bad. But here's a nice little trick for a lot of you younger viewers. All you need to do is line it up with a beginning inch, measure the other side, and don't worry about the big numbers. All you're worried about is from that inch mark over, what is it? Well, and if you count, I know this one should be a 3/4. Let's test it out. Here's a 3/4 end wrench. Let's see if it fits. Looky there. Fits just fine. And yes, I do believe that will also work with your sockets, so that way you know for sure what size socket you need, or wrench, or whatever you're going to need to work that particular bolt or nut. Now, why might you need that specifically? You got your tools right here. What happens if you're working on a wheel end and you need something to get this thing off? Most mechanics won't have these in their toolbox. It will be back in the tool room. It will be a shop tool. And again, take this, because yeah, it's messed up at the beginning. It's kind of hard to read it all. But you can come on out here, put the 5 on there, read it over. So it's 9 1/8. So subtract 5 from 9. I need a 4 1/8 socket to fit this thing. So now I can walk back to the tool room, pick me up a 4 1/8 socket. Might grab the 4-inch just to be safe, because usually the axles will protrude through and it might throw off your measurement. Take the one below, the one above, and the one that you measure. Pretty sure one of those are going to fit. That way you should be able to remove your axle nut and get in there to change the wheel seal or whatever you're doing that you need to take that off with. So now, one other thing, you will get occasionally some odd size. You've got all threads with regular nuts, lock nuts. This is again a top lock type nut. But occasionally you'll find some odd sizes, like this here. This is an old head bolt, and as you can see from the markings, it's a metric. So, not a 12. Let's see, not a 13. Let's see if it's 14. 14 fits this top part real easy. Doesn't fit this. What's going on here? If it fits the shank, shouldn't it fit the threads? Well, let's try the 15. It does fit. This is what happens to be a rolled thread bolt. And what that does, instead of cutting the threads, they roll them in, which means they're making some of them, making part of it smaller, but that means that it's pushing out the other. So the threads are actually slightly wider than the shank. Now, if this had been cut with a die, then this whole thing would be the same all the way up and down. But it's not, because it's been rolled instead, so the threads are actually bigger than the head. So remember that. What you're really looking for is thread size. And then you also may have some of these that are different yet. Well, like say this here. You've got a solid shank, then you've got your turn down and your threads. This is actually was for holding a shifter to the lower portion. So you didn't want threads there to cut into the opening or the plastic bushings as you're working that shifter back and forth and around. So they do something like this that will go all the way through the inner and outer shifter, and then all you need to do is put a washer and nut on it to hold the plastic bushings in place and keep the thing from coming apart. Little things like that. Striker bolts and things, there's a whole bunch of those. I thought, yeah, like this here. This is actually a striker bolt, and it threads into something, and then the latch will go around the heavy or large part. But again, you can do the same thing to find out the size of the threads and the size of your striker plate or striker part, because these come in different sizes, different dimensions, so you'll need to measure the thickness here as well as the length, the size of your threads and length, and threads per inch or threads per millimeter, depending on whether it's metric or SAE. And this one has no markings, so it could be either SAE or metric, but again, you would just simply go down, find a nice small end wrench, find out, okay, well that's a 9, that would be pretty close, but an 8 fits better. Does that mean that this is an 8 millimeter? No, it's probably 5/16, but that's for later on. But anyway, I think hopefully now you've got a little bit more information about how to determine if it's metric or SAE. There are a few oddballs out there. Now, this one has some numbers or letters and stuff, but you can see it's 8.8. That means it's a metric. I thought I had, aha. Now this is an odd one because there's numbers, but no 8.8, no 10.9, no 12.9. Is that metric or is it SAE? Well, like I said, there's always exceptions to pretty much every rule. This particular one is probably an SAE, but because of these markings here, it's a stainless. Stainless will be marked differently. Some manufacturers mark them different ways. Hopefully this will let you know kind of what to look for and what you're needing to know. And again, like I said, some of these, they don't have any marks. They could be either or, but by taking your end wrenches, fitting them around your threads, and then taking your pitch finders, metric, SAE, you can find out for sure which they are. And as far as finding out what wrench or socket to put on, simple little old tape measure will work wonders for that stuff if you've got to go a distance and you don't want to take a whole bunch of wrenches or tools to the job site. Most of us will have little kits like this that we can just grab and go. Not everybody has that luxury. Hopefully I've covered some of the bare basics on this. One other thing to remember is a lot of people seem to think the black or the gold coloring are your hardest ones. Maybe, maybe not. Because I've run across some of these that are black colored, and instead of the 12.9, they're 10.9 or 8.8. I've also found some of these that are black in color. They have no markings at all, so basically this is a very soft bolt. And if you look close, that bolt is bent. So this is not a structural, really sound bolt. It's used for smaller stuff, nothing that really holds a whole lot of tension, clamping force. These with the markings, 6 slashes, that means it's a grade 8 bolt. That means it's a very hard bolt. There is a difference between hard and strong. Hard can be brittle. Some of your grade 5s will bend or stretch before it will break. A grade 8 or 12.9 will break before they stretch. They may stretch a little bit, but not much. They're much more apt to break if they are over torqued than a grade 5 or non-graded type bolt. This one you could probably bend it without even heating it a fair bit. Now if you take something like this and try to bend it without heating it, you're going to snap it because it is a very hard bolt. So like I said, hopefully this gives you a little bit of information about bolts and how to identify which they are. And remember, there's always those exceptions that prove the rule. And anyway, if you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. And also, leave me a comment or two for other things like this that you want to see. I'll see if I can work something in here and maybe get you some answers to some burning questions that you're needing. And I do have a future video planned for threading or repairing threads, I should say. So meet me here for that one in an upcoming video. Till then, stay safe, stay well, and work hard. Bye.